Hi, hello everyone. Welcome to Disasters Deconstructed live stream. It's great to see you all. As you can see, I have a different partner today, different co-host. It's Gonzalo. Hi, Gonzalo.
Hi, Ksenia, how are you?
Uh, it's great to have you and great to co-host with you. So Jason had a work emergency, so he kind of left us um, on our own, but we will try and manage without him and don't miss him too much. So
Sure.
we today are celebrating the 20th anniversary of the iRec. And of course, it's the network that we've all been part of and enjoyed thoroughly, not quite for 20 years for some of us, but nevertheless, in the past few years. And in the next 2 weeks, so today and next Friday, we are going to celebrate the 20th anniversary through conversations with friends that have supported the network for through this 20 years. And so today we are going to bring to you the kind of the original members, right? People who have really been with the network for a while. And Gonzalo in a second will be telling you more about the network. So this is going to be really exciting. We have Rohit Jigiasu with us today. We've got Suzanne Wilkinson, Cassidy Johnson, and Ali Asghari. And I'm sure you recognize all these names already. And so just to introduce Gonzalo, for those of you who may not know him, which I doubt very much, everybody knows you, Gonzalo. Um, Gonzalo Lizarralde is a professor at the School of Architecture at the University of Montreal, Canada. He has 15 years of experience in consulting for architecture and construction projects and has been publishing in a wide range of areas to do with low-cost housing, project management, resilience, climate change adaptation, and so on. Gonzalo has taught at the University of Cape Town, McGill University, Universitat de Valle and Universitat Javeriana, which I have now butchered the name, I think, of. And currently, Gonzalo is also a director of the IF Research Group in Montreal and the leader of the Disaster Resilience and Sustainable Reconstruction Research Alliance. And he is, of course, the founding member of iRec, this international network, which anniversary we are celebrating today. So over to you, Gonzalo.
Thank you very much, Ksenia. This is very exciting. I'm very glad to see Cassidy and Suzanne and Ali and Rohit and you today celebrating 20 years of networking and working together in the field of disasters and reconstruction. Let me tell you a little bit for those who do not know about iRec. iRec started about 20 years ago when a group of us, Cassidy, Colin Davidson, Ali, Rahid, decided to start networking around subjects such as disasters and vulnerability and reconstruction. And at that time, we realized that there were not many conferences on those specific areas, and not particularly in English. And we wanted to network and organize conferences and organize activities around those subjects. Today, there are many other networks. Today, there are many other activities and conferences in that field. But at that time, in 2002, there was not so many. So we decided to organize the first conference in Montreal in 2002 and the first iRec competition. So we included in the conference a student competition where we invited the students of architecture and urban planning and built environment in general to propose ideas to challenge kind of those top-down approaches to reconstruction and to think about processes of reconstruction and think about the people and think about the communities. And we organized then the first competition in parallel with the conference. And it has been like that for 20 years. We have met in different places. We've met in Florence, we met in the UK, in India, in New Zealand, in Toronto. And it has been an exciting journey, meeting with hundreds of people. Today, iRec has hundreds of members in our social media. And it has been a very exciting journey, networking, learning from each other. There have been several edited books, for example, that have been prepared by different groups of people within iRec. There have been 10 student competitions and the conferences and all of this. So this is very exciting. Unfortunately, the pandemic didn't allow us to have a live conference last year, but we're looking forward for our next conference in Japan next year. And this is going to be, again, very exciting. Something interesting about iRec is that it doesn't have a proper structure like administration or something. It's just about networking and finding interesting people and meeting friends and joining efforts and working together. So it is my very great pleasure to introduce Cassidy Johnson. Cassidy was with me at the University of Montreal, studying her PhD with me in, in, in about 2000. And it was with Cassidy and Colin Davidson that we thought we might need some some groups to talk about these things, and we started this journey with Cassidy, and she became a very good friend of mine, and I'm really happy to see Cassidy today. Cassidy is a professor of urbanism and disaster risk reduction at the Bartlett Development Planning Unit at UCL, where she researches and teaches about disaster risk, about disaster recovery, and climate change adaptation. Cassidy's academic interests are linked by a commitment to improve the quality of life and livelihoods of low-income groups living in urban areas. Her research contributes to the area of disaster risk reduction and recovery, and to the role of local governments and civil society in this, and to integrating an understanding of disaster risk into development. This has encompassed issues of urban planning, housing quality, building code regulations, informal settlements, and evictions. Cassidy has worked in more than 8 countries across Asia and Africa, including Turkey, Thailand, Bangladesh, India, Tanzania, Uganda, and Malawi, and has been with us in the iRec network for 20 years. So Cassidy, this is very exciting. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, this is really exciting to be here, and thank you for the introduction, Gonzalo. And a big thank you to Ksenia and to Jason for organizing this event today. I was very pleased to be part of it.
Great.
And yeah, and I think that, and a big thank you to Gonzalo, because I think, you know, we did our PhD together, and then I left UCL, and I think you've really carried the torch for iRec, and I'm always appreciative of all the work you've done to keep iRec going. So a big thank you
Thank you,
for that,
Cassie.
for 20 years of work that I think without your driving force would have just sort of died away. So appreciate very much, and I think many of us do.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah.
Do you want me to remind you maybe to tell everybody how we're going to be working in this discussion today? We invited our guests to reflect on their experience with previous IRIC events. It can be conferences or student competitions or the online debates. So we have asked our friends 3 questions. The first question is, what has IREC achieved since its beginning in 2002? And we want to reflect also on what it has failed to achieve. Maybe what are the good things and maybe the things that we haven't been able to do. The second question is, how has IREC impacted your work? Maybe your research agenda or maybe your networking activities. And third, how is IREC different from other networks? What is particular about us? What is distinguishing us from maybe other networks or associations or groups in disaster work? So, Cassidy, can we start with the first question? What has IREC achieved since 2002?
Thank you. Well, I think that thinking back to the first conference when we had, I remember Rohit coming and we met. I should have a picture actually of us because I remember us going for a meeting together. And I think that there's a number of things we've achieved, and even this event and this series of events, I think, shows the kind of longevity that this network has. I think that iRec has enabled us to build a network of researchers that work on reconstruction and recovery issues that didn't exist. So it's a kind of researcher-focused network. I think there are sort of links to practice, and we have people who are part of the network who are going and working for NGOs or in local governments or other organizations that actually are on the ground doing reconstruction. So it's a kind of interface between research and the practice of reconstruction and those people who will go and intervene. So I think it's sort of achieved that kind of that network of practice to research. I think the student competitions have been amazing, and I have students who've participated in the past, and I think they reach a very wide audience, and they bring in students who may never think, they may think about, like architecture students may think about how to design an emergency house or something like that, like a kind of the architecture element. But what it makes them also think about is all of those social and political and infrastructure and governance and all those other elements that are not architecture. And I think that for some students, that's really the first introduction to those things and sort of opens their eyes. So I think the competition has been amazing for that. I will say maybe one thing that it's failed to achieve. I don't know if it's failed, but Colin Davidson, in his original idea, who is our PhD supervisor of Gonzalo and I, and was the one who sort of said we should start this network. He really wanted iRec to be something that would go and intervene on the ground. So we would talk about things, and then we would go out when there was a disaster and be there on the ground. And I think that we haven't achieved that as a network. I don't necessarily agree with his point. I understood his point, but I think that what we've done is managed a kind of interface between those who do go on and do things on the ground, a chance for them to reflect on their practice. And I think that's where we stand at this moment in time.
True. It's true that you're pointing to something very, very relevant, is the fact that we have focused on creating those links, but not necessarily intervening. And I remember we were having these discussions, Cassidy, at the time, of conflicts of interest. How much can we get involved on the ground and at the same time keep distance to reflect critically on what's going on the ground? So yeah, I think that has been one of the key features. And what about your work, Cassidy? How has impacted iRec your current activities now that you're a successful scholar in London? What is that impact?
Yeah, just one thing, just to follow up on the comment that you just made. Like, for example, we organized the conference in 2015 here at UCL. And I think the interesting thing is what you have in the UK, and it's different in every country. It depends where the conference is. But what we have in the UK are these huge amount of international NGOs, and this is their headquarters. And so what we had in that conference was a lot of people coming from those organizations into the conference. And then, the conference in Florence, we had people from local government there and people who work in recovery. So it's different by conference who those practitioners are. But to answer your question about how it's impacted my work, I think one is it's built this community of researchers. I would say that while my PhD work was focused on the post-disaster reconstruction in Turkey after 1999, I think I've moved away from working personally on reconstruction and more to looking at disaster risk reduction and urbanization and a little bit different field. But I think one, iRec has been important for continuing my investigations and journey on recovery and reconstruction, which has not been an active part of my research. But I think mostly it's been such an amazing resource for my PhD students. And I've had several PhD students who've worked on recovery, whether it's Nepal or Haiti or Iran and others. And I think that iRec has been a really important home for those students, and they've really got a lot out of being part of the iRec network. Yeah.
It's true that through students also we have been able to produce some impact. Almost in every conference we have had a group of PhD or master students, and some of them have become successful scholars on their own. So it's another way of also impacting people. And I think you were right also in pointing out that many of those students come from architecture or design or urban planning, and it's the first experience they have when they meet so deeply with social issues and cultural issues related to risk and vulnerability. So I guess that's also an important aspect of the impact. Then maybe a few words, Cassidy, on how is this different from other networks? At that time, there were very few networks. Facebook was perhaps only starting, and so were other social media platforms. Today, they're commonplace, but still, iRec has some relevance in producing things in a different way. But how different are we from other networks that might exist through social media, for example? How is this particularly different or not?
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, just following up on the last point too, I'll say one of my students just completed her PhD looking at the recovery in Haiti, and she's Haitian by background, and she looked at the centre-ville in Port-au-Prince and land issues. And I think that sort of the iRec framing was quite important for her to think about those larger issues, because she's a practicing architect. So it's also like working in an architecture firm, like intervening in different situations around the Caribbean, for example. But iRec gave that important framing, and she ended up looking at land, for example, which is not something that an architect cares about generally. You know, a piece of land is a piece of land. But just I think you already answered the question on how iRec is different. I think what it is, as you said, there isn't a formal organization. It's a network of people, and I think that's a real strength. It's not rigid. It's flexible by design. People come in, they're interested, they organize conferences, they might move on to something else, or they might stay part of the network. And I think that flexibility is what makes it different from other networks. There's no proper organization. It's just people want to do it because they want to.
Thank you, Cassidy.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much, Cassidy. And of course, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. So for the audience, if you have any questions, do post them either wherever you're watching on social media. I'm trying to monitor it, to test my multitasking abilities today. But you'll see Cassidy in a few minutes' time. Our next guest today is our friend and colleague, whom you all know pretty well. It's Rohit Jigiasu. Hi, Rohit. Welcome back. Great to have you again on the podcast. Rohit is currently working at ICROM in Rome, of course, as a project manager on urban heritage, climate change, and disaster risk management. And Rohit has done everything. So he has served as UNESCO chairholder professor at the Institute for Disaster Mitigation and Urban Cultural Heritage at Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto, Japan. He was also the elected president of the ICMOS India and the president of ICMOS International Scientific Committee on Risk Preparedness. And of course, he's one of the early members of iRec. So it's fantastic to have you here today, Rohit. And just to again remind you of the questions, tell us, what do you think iRec has achieved since its foundation, and what it means for you being part of the network? How has impacted your work? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ksenia. Thank you. First of all, it's such a delight to be here. So many memories are coming alive, especially when for the first time I came over to Montreal and met Cassidy and Gonzalo. So I'm just remembering that time 20 years ago, and a lot of things kind of come flashing by. So to answer your first question, what has iRec achieved? I was doing my PhD and I was really at loss to find people who are doing work like me, I felt like I'm doing something out of this world where I cannot relate to anyone who has worked in this area. So whom should I talk to? Who should I really get in touch with? And that was the time when I had this great opportunity when the conference was being organized, which Gonzalo and Cassidy just mentioned. And I went there and I saw, no, I'm not the only one. There are actually people really doing work in this area. It's just that I don't know about them. And the other thing which I then realized was that there is so much virtue in connecting with not only researchers but also those who are doing work in the field, but researchers don't know about them. So how do we kind of learn from each other, practitioners and researchers? This was the other thing that I kind of started to recognize. So I remember when we had this first iRec, this gave me this real insight that there is so much we can do by connecting with each other, not only academics or researchers, but also practitioners, and learning from each other. So I think the first big achievement is that in 20 years, that network has really grown substantially. From me looking for somebody, I think now we are a big group of people who are researchers and practitioners who are part of this network. And I would also say that the other important thing that this network has really managed to achieve is multidisciplinarity. interdisciplinarity, because when I was working in the area of, I mean, I was in the Department of Planning. My area of expertise is heritage conservation. So I really had a very limited exposure to professionals from other disciplines who are working in this area. And what iRec kind of made me realize is that you can address these issues from multiple perspectives, and the whole discussion becomes so enriching when you have all these professionals coming from different disciplines, kind of not only researchers but also those who are working in the field, coming and speaking with each other from their perspectives. So I think this kind of a multidisciplinary approach has really got strengthened through a network like iRec in this area of post disaster reconstruction. And I feel that also one of the other achievements which I feel is very substantial is that we have really tried to or managed to place reconstruction within the larger development agenda, because we used to feel like, well, we work in disaster area, disaster reconstruction is a specific kind of area of our work. But what we have seen over the years, and iRec has, I think, contributed a lot to it, is that the fact that really you can't look at it separated from the larger development agenda. So that I think we have really this network has managed to achieve. The other important thing which I feel is this network has managed to give a platform to young researchers. I know that there have been, I mean, I was a young researcher when I came in for the first time, but I have seen over so many iRec conferences that a lot of researchers, the young researchers, this is their first opportunity to present, in an international audience, and it gives them such a boost, confidence that there is something they learn and they contribute. So I think that's another big achievement, that it has been a great platform for young researchers to really participate and share their views. Now, in terms of failure or what it has failed to achieve, I feel like there are a couple of things which I think one can work on. I really feel that sometimes we do these conferences, but somehow we don't see how we have been, what is the pathway we are taking. 20 years means that we have to be also able to track what we have managed to change over the years, what kind of a new thinking has developed over the years. So, what is the kind of progression in terms of the new ways of? So, I feel like since iRec has been in existence for 20 years, this is high time for us to also start reflecting back on where we were, where we need to go, what we have achieved over last 20 years. So I think that kind of a retrospective is really essential, and I think we can probably do a lot. Also, I feel that maybe it's also, although iRec has been responsible for some publications which have been very important as a source of knowledge, but I feel that maybe it would be also good to carry on this agenda of providing young professionals a platform for them to be able to contribute their writings, to their specifically for the young professionals and young researchers. Probably this is something one can encourage. Although iRec competition has been really doing a lot for the architecture students, but I feel like maybe for them to be able to write, contribute scientific papers, because sometimes it is very hard for them to find a place, and that may be encouraged. How has iRec impacted my work? Maybe is the next question, right?
Yeah.
So it has impacted my work in all these ways that I just mentioned. I have this amazing network of professionals, researchers, like all of them who are here, and many more. And iRec has been the network responsible for having them, and made so many friendships, and have collaborated with a lot of them over the years. So that's one thing. The other thing which it has impacted is cultural heritage. I come from a heritage field, and then you know it very well. A lot of my fellow professionals are very much in their own little world. And what iRec managed to do for me was it made me connect to the larger world of professionals outside my core area of cultural heritage management. So I could relate to development practitioners, all kinds of professionals, and that has really enriched my own work, and which you know how we have been working together as well.
Yeah.
It's just an example of how we have been able to mainstream heritage or culture in the larger discourse. So the last question that you had was the third one, was how is iRec different from other networks and groups or associations? I think it is very different. Although we have so many networks existing now, I mean, there is, as you said, in social media is full of, you know, you can click on a Facebook and you can be joining any group anytime. And it was not the same 20 years ago. But I think the longevity, the sustainability of this network is relying on the fact that we have a very physical, personal contact. It's not just a virtual contact. We have managed to actually be put a face to people, make relationships which are much more human. I think that's one thing which iRec network has, which I don't see in many more networks. There maybe these other virtual networks are very easy to make, but difficult to sustain on a you know, on a personal kind of a networking relationship. So I think that is definitely one of the bigger achievements. And I also feel that iRec is giving a lot of importance to, because we are not just doing it in one part of the world, we move around the world. And you know, from starting from Canada, I mean, one of my greatest experience has been to bring it to India. And so many of others who were in the network, you know, the biggest thing was that once we joined the network, we wanted to bring it to our own place. You know, we wanted that people should come and listen to what others are doing in our part of the world. So that kind of you know, that kind of thing has, I feel, been different than those networks which are kind of static, kind of more formalized, which we are not. So that would be my response to your third question.
For sure. Thank you so much, Rohit. And indeed, you know, I really loved that you talked about friendships that developed at iRec, and also early career academics and practitioners. I feel that it's just such a welcoming environment, you know, and that's what Cassidy was talking about. There is no kind of power structure, right? And that, I guess, allows everybody to just play together and work together. And that's great. Yeah. Thank you so much, Rohit. Gonzalo, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Cassidy. Thank you very much, Rohit, for reminding us about all those very interesting things that we've done together and the conference in India, and how iRec has contributed to integrate also issues of heritage. This has been something very important since the beginning, and we believe on the power of producing change that has a cultural meaning. And you have been a key person in transmitting that message, the importance of producing action and producing interventions that have a cultural relevance for communities and for people. That has been very important. So it is my pleasure now to introduce Suzanne. Suzanne Wilkinson is a professor of construction management in the School of Built Environment, Massey University, and Associate Dean of Research, College of Sciences at Massey University. Suzanne's research focuses on resilience, disaster management, construction innovation, and smart cities. Suzanne has been advisor to organizations on resilience building and disaster recovery, most recently including Auckland Council, government agencies in New Zealand, and Hunter Water in Australia. Thank you very much, Suzanne, for joining us. You can probably hear my kids around here, but it's very nice to see you. I have very nice memories of the time we spent in Christchurch with this conference you co-organized there. It was an amazing time. A couple of years later, there was the disaster in Christchurch, so we were able to visit the town when it had its very original character, and sad things happened a couple of years later. And you have been a key person in putting together iRec activities in that part of the world. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me today, and really love to talk about iRec. So I actually went through the archives of iRec to see what was going on, because I have been part of iRec from 2004 was when we first kind of got wind that this was going on in Montreal, and one of my colleagues, Jason Lemazurier, was was very much an iRec promoter to New Zealand. And so we first had our kind of really active involvement in 2006. So I went back through the iRec archives, and I think there's 4 kind of themes that I want to just talk about. One is the really good thing about iRec is the international reach. An unbelievable number of papers from different countries, and being a researcher, I counted them up. And there's we've had over 40 countries have been contributed to iRec. I mean, that's kind of amazing. And some recurring countries or case studies about those countries. And the top 10, if you want to know that, are Turkey, UK, India, Iran, Italy, Indonesia, New Zealand, fantastic, Japan, Chile, and the Philippines. Now, these have all talked about some of the key kind of things that have happened in their countries, the disasters that have happened in their countries, the way communities have responded, and the way in which kind of housing or infrastructure has been reconstructed. And so their kind of wealth of, I think one of the big things about iRec is the wealth of knowledge that the archives have in them. So the second thing I want to say is it covers some fundamental themes in the kind of recovery and reconstruction field. Those would be around housing. I think housing has been a dominant theme in iRec, in particular around kind of sustainability, housing design, low-cost housing, temporary versus permanent housing, things around looking at modern and traditional structures and how they work in a disaster. So if you want to know anything about housing post-disaster, iRec has a resource for that, and I think that's kind of an excellent resource around understanding the post-disaster impacts or the disaster impact on housing and how different countries tackle that disaster recovery and reconstruction around their housing stock. The second kind of theme that I think is a common theme is obviously community participation, how the communities come together to rebuild and reconstruct, the power relationships between community and governance. I think these are really common themes that come out in the iRec field, in the archives. And that extends outwards to wider stakeholders. So for instance, looking at NGOs, which Cassidy mentioned, but also other stakeholders, insurance companies, governance, and how governance operates within the disaster field. And I think the third kind of core theme I think that's come out of iRec, which I think has been very useful, is some of the practitioner stuff around technologies, tools, processes, techniques. And, we call these different things, but essentially they provide guidance, assessment mechanisms, guidance for different organizations, current up-to-date information about what's been used, what's been successful. So evidence-based information around these tools and technologies. And I think that's been an absolutely fundamental thing for researchers. I think the other thing the third thing I would say is that it's universal in what it considers. So whilst it's got some common themes, it's also covered some universal in what it considers. And what I would say about that is, it doesn't matter if it's a volcano, a flood, a tsunami, it doesn't, a cyclone, it doesn't particularly matter, because, you will always find within the iRec community somebody who's got some knowledge that can help with both practice and researchers getting started. So I think it has that kind of universal feel to it. And the last thing I would say is it's kind of grown and matured. I think in 2006, when we first came, I think there was a lot of, up till 2006, I would say there was an emphasis on architecture, housing, planning, that kind of thing. But as we went through the years, we started to see more of the urbanization, more of the resilience themes coming through. 2010, we started to see war, reconstruction from war, and I think that was kind of like a really critical turning point for iRec. I thought it was really interesting looking through those archives. I think we've moved more into comparative studies, which has been really good. We've used like past experience and past knowledge from iRec to do those comparative studies. And more recently, I think we've kind of moved more into the displacement and some of the refugee, climate change, adaptation type work. So what I would say is fundamentally, we're right at the cutting edge all the time of where we should be as a group of researchers and practitioners. Failure, I'm not really sure that I can talk very much. I guess the political impact is one of the things. I think Cassidy mentioned that. I probably agree with her. We have an international voice in so many countries, and that voice probably could be more impactful politically, but that may not be where you want to take iRec. So it's not a failure, it's just a kind of commentary on that. I guess the other thing I would say is it's been a really good network for exchanging ideas, but exchanging students, getting a kind of more of a students moving around to different locations more widely. I think that would be a good thing that iRec could work on. My work has been significantly impacted by iRec. I think the first thing is being part of a community of practice is always a good thing for academics, because you don't have to be the expert in absolutely everything, but you can see what's going on and what current themes and what the thinking is for people. And I've always found that iRec has been incredibly welcoming, and that community of practice has been really, really, really important. We've sent people to iRec in different guises since 2006, be it a group of students or academics or myself, and we hosted iRec, I think it was in 2008. So it created a community of practice. In terms of our work in New Zealand, the 2008 conference was a significant turning point for recovery and reconstruction policy work, because it was the first time we had people listening to us within the government, and so we started to have more of a voice within New Zealand. And then when the earthquakes happened, 2010, 2011, that was quite a significant thing for us in terms of using some of the iRec information and using evidence-based information into policy. So I remember being called up to Wellington to be asked, what do you know about recovery policies, plans, structures in other countries? And I was just able to go, well, we got a lot from iRec. So, it's been a significant, draw for me. Personally, I've kind of really benefited from being part of iRec. So I think those great enduring relationships have been really great within, from iRec. I suppose the other thing about what I've personally gained is it's given me a much broader view, and I heard Rohit say the same thing, a much wider view of what disaster recovery and reconstruction is. So I think that's allowed for me to bring that to my students and to my classes, when we're not just looking, my field is construction, and I'm not just now looking at construction. We've got the community, we've got to think about how our work impacts community, how our work impacts the wider stakeholders, and that's been a really important part. And I think if we're going to just talk about what the network, how the network is different, I would, really say that it's been future focused. I think this network has been. It's been very diverse, and it's been incredibly welcoming. So you never go to an iRec conference without feeling like the warm and fuzzies. So I hope you continue to keep that kind of vibe.
Thank you, Suzanne. And I must say that we felt very welcome when we went to Christchurch too. So we really appreciated it. And I really enjoyed the summary that you presented of how the iRec themes have evolved over time. That was amazing. Thank you very much, Suzanne. So nice to see you.
Thank you, Suzanne. And we have one more guest today, Ali, who has, of course, been critical for this network, right, for kind of keeping it running. So it's fantastic that Ali is able to join us today. Hi, Ali.
Hello.
So Ali is an associate professor of disaster and emergency management at York University in Canada. He's also the director of SciFel York, an associate director of York University's Advanced Disaster Emergency and Rapid Response Simulation. His research and teaching interests include post-disaster recovery and reconstruction, organizational and business resilience, and disaster and emergency simulation, modeling, and visualization. Ali, same questions to you. What iRec means for you, what impact has it had, and what could it do
Absolutely.
better?
Thank you so much. And I just want to thank you all, Tanzania and Gonzalo, for organizing and hosting this session. And it's also a great pleasure to be with my colleagues in this panel. I echo, first of all, everything was said already. I'm trying to avoid duplication and repeating those very well said comments and contributions. But I have to emphasize some of those in a way that I feel relates to me in particular. I think iRec was really fundamental in creating a space for networking among professionals, researchers, and students in an informal, let's say, way. I'll talk about this later in more detail. It was able to connect the students and professors in a way that is not, it's outside the typical student professor relation. As you well mentioned, is no power structure that reduces the possibility of engagement and working together. I felt that through all the conferences and also through my interaction with every participants in the conferences and through the network, interactions and even virtual contributions. Of course, student competition has been also instrumental in enabling the students to present their works in a competitive way, let's say, which also helps them to get ready for professional practice. That is, of course, what most of them will be doing after they graduate. And so this was another, I think, important aspect of iRec work, and I'm really glad that this continued. Not every competition usually lasts this long, and I'm glad that this is an integral part of this network. And we have, as you know, the 10th competition coming up soon in terms of announcing the winners of the competition. And on the other side, I think not the failure, but I would look into possibilities and opportunity. I think there are lots of opportunities for growth in iRec. I would see issues or problems or challenges mostly in branding and naming of the network. I really think we probably need to think about this, how best we can, if we can, or if we need to make that happen. For example, if you do a search on just iRec, the phrase iRec, you will find a lot of synonyms or similar names for different networks, different organizations, etc. That makes it very hard for the first time, researchers who are looking for these kind of networks to distinguish and find this network. This is what I feel important to sort of branding or rebranding iRec. As I said, I try to avoid repeating what already said. In terms of how iRec impacted my work, I should say in many different ways, but I would like to emphasize on two aspects of this. One was, of course, giving me a different lens of what I can call it social justice lens. I'm coming from economic and urban planning background to this post-disaster recovery and reconstruction, which of course you may, see it, looking at it from different angles when it comes to this particular. But working with colleagues and friends here, especially in the iRec network, and the emphasis on social justice and equity and diversity elements and importance of this in post-disaster recovery reconstruction has been always into my thinking and my research projects as I continued focusing more on post-disaster recovery and reconstruction. And the other thing is, of course, as mentioned already clearly by my colleagues and friends, this opportunity for collaboration. I have already established really nice collaborations with many of you. Just to name a few: Gonzalo, of course, Cassidy, Lee, and Jason. We have already major projects together, and also with emerging scholars in the field like Mahmoud, like Patan. I wouldn't know them unless it happened through this network, which was amazing. And I'm looking forward to work with new people in the network as well. Now, for the last question, sorry, I'm going to question just to save time quickly. And as mentioned also by my colleagues, I like iRec in its own shape as it is, being very informal, meaning exactly sort of free membership, both in terms of cost and in terms of open. It's like an open network, if we call like open source or open access. This is an open network of friendly people coming together, working together in a very informal relationship. But strong and rigor, I would say also, and also very critical. I mean, adding critical thinking to the network aspect. Diversity, as mentioned very well by Susan, is very amazing and interesting part of it, in terms of gender, in terms of different backgrounds, etc. This is really interesting network from that angle as well. And the fact that, I mean, this may not be important, but it is also a very low cost, affordable network when it comes to conferences, activities, etc. It doesn't provide any burden to people, whether students or others, to become a member, which is very different from some other organizations. You have to pay regular annual fee. Sometimes it's not really affordable. And the fact that all the conferences that we have had is not for making money. It is for networking. You all know that some other networks and professional agencies, organizations, they do some of these conferences really to make money. And it's not the case here. We want to create create the conferences as low as cost as possible to enable everyone to attend. I mean, it's not always possible, but it has been, I think, the intention and practice of whoever organized these conferences. And I finish with this, that I see possibilities, potential for growth in iRec, and I think despite the informality, we can possibly work together with the members and find ways to shape it or reshape it in a way that it grows to the level that is needed. I stop here and thank you again for this, and looking forward to conversations or questions from the audience. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ali.
Well, thank you very much, Ali. It's very nice to see you. I must confess that I'm becoming very emotional here. This is bringing lots of memories. There is always some kind of energy when we meet and when we discuss about these things. And honestly, I'm quite emotional at this moment. Thank you very much for your comments and for reflecting on these issues. We have talked about the importance of iRec in introducing new subjects. We have talked about the importance of exploring new areas of research. We've talked about facilitating knowledge transfer, how we have been able to facilitate this knowledge transfer, not only between scholars, but also between academia and practice and policymakers. We have talked about how important this has been for helping students build their own careers and become scholars on their own and successful scholars on their own, and about this idea of creating collectively new knowledge and by bringing together different expertises and areas of knowledge, being able to create something new and something original. But we have also talked about some challenges. We talked about the challenge of impacting policy. It's not always easy to impact policymakers, and we have sometimes struggled with that. We have talked about the difficulty of transferring this knowledge into practice. Sometimes we don't want to do it. We don't want to be on the ground. Sometimes we want to impact the people who can produce that impact. But for some people, that might not be sufficient. Sometimes we might want to create some direct impact on the ground. We have talked about the importance of branding and how we are recognized among other communities, and how can we distinguish ourselves in the new era of social media. And about size, maybe we can have more impact, maybe we can reach new audiences. This has always been a challenge for all of us. I'm very glad to see other people chatting and commenting. For example, Bernie De Villa, who has attended a couple of conferences, and Lee Bosher, who has been also a key person in the network. So good morning or good afternoon for you, Lee. It's very nice to know that you're around, because you have been a key person in this process. So now let's finish with more reflections. Now, when we started this, social media was perhaps only starting, and now social media is omnipresent everywhere. There are many other networks. We also went through a pandemic period. We were locked down, and we had to rely more and more, for example, on online debates, such as the one we have been conducting. We had to rely more on electronic platforms. So this begs the question, what is coming next? How can we keep doing this work as the world has changed? Social media is different today than before. We're more used to Zoom and team meetings than before. We're perhaps traveling less than before. How is this going to impact? What is coming next for iRec, or what can we do differently? Let's start with Cassidy, and in the same order we participated. Cassidy, what do you think is next, or we should do next?
Yeah, I think that the meeting face to face is a very important part of iRec, because we have this ability, I mean, those elements, but maybe, of course, we all need to travel less with climate change, and the sort of argument for coming together for a meeting is sort of less salient than it was before. So I think that we need to be particularly mindful of that, and maybe consider having online conferences between the meeting conferences or something like that. I also like that Ali brought up the issues around diversity and intersectionality, and I think this is a big theme coming up in our field in general. Yep.
Great. Thank you, Cassidy. Then what about Suzanne? What do you have in mind? What is changing, and what do we need to change to adapt to what's coming in the future?
Well, I would probably agree with Cassidy on this. I mean, I think there's a opportunity for hybrid conferences where you have a core group that might come together, but then it's much widely publicized, and you have the kind of combination of social media type activities as well as the main activities. And I think what that will allow is for those people who can't get to a location to still participate. And I think we've all learned that there are some really good ways of participating using the kind of these sorts of platforms. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is to kind of capitalize on the work that's already been done and the number of people that have already participated, to maybe kind of build a bigger core. And so it's not just on, I mean, we kind of rely on, you and Cassidy and Nick, Kanisha and Ali to kind of keep things running. But I think 20 years of running a conferences and a network is tremendous, but you might get a bit tired after a while. So, and obviously Rohit as well. So I think, maybe bringing some of those new people in to explore how they might participate in putting things together is an opportunity for the network.
And maybe integrating the new scholars, the new PhD students, for example,
absolutely.
that are coming out of Cassidy's or Ali's teams, and integrate them more. That's a very good idea. Then what about you, Rohit? What do you have in mind? How are we going to keep adapting to as the world changes?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I really feel we need to do more is the field-based workshops, because learning from the field cannot replace anything. And I feel like we have to put more emphasis on doing such workshops. And what iRec has experimented, I remember even in India, we had a very, even having a dialogue under a tree or do it in a very informal way can be more productive sometimes. So I feel like we should continue to go in that direction and really have this dialogue coming from bottom up as much as we talk of researchers telling what they have found. So this has to really go on further, and we should continue to experiment with new models. And I would say this hybrid mode can enable that. It can in fact facilitate that. That even when we go to these remote locations, we have possibilities for others to join in and see what kind of learnings are coming in. So we should. That's something that I would argue for. And the other thing which I feel, as has been already mentioned, is that there are a couple of case studies that are now there, and it's important that we revisit some of them, because the ideas that are presented are kind of, and we have learned that what we learn maybe 1 year after any reconstruction project is very different than what happens 5 to 10 years down the lane. And it's very important for us to sometimes revisit those and see where what we were talking about and what has actually happened, and are there some new learnings from there. So I think this long-term perspective has to be also strengthened, and I feel iRec can play a very important role in that area as well.
I'm very glad that you talk about the workshops because almost every conference has had some direct contact with the fieldwork and with people. And I guess we all remember that conversation with the elders under the tree talking about the Gujarat experience of reconstruction. And that was amazing. And we thank you. And we will always thank you for that experience you organized. Ali, a few words before we finish. What do you think we should keep doing and change eventually?
I just echo what was already mentioned, particularly what Susan mentioned about the impacts and importance of this hybrid. Is not just about ability or accessibility to the conference, but also for many of us, at least for me, I couldn't attend all iRec conferences mainly because of the overlap. And it is not the timing overlap, it's just to travel, for example, from here, Canada, to somewhere else in the world, it takes at least 2 weeks. But the conference itself is 2 days. It enables me to, to sit or be wherever I have to be and also participate in this iRec conference and vice versa. So this is really important. And also make it possible for others who may not be affordable for them, or because of visas, because of all those things, to participate. It's really good to be able to continue our conferences both face-to-face and online hybrid format for all these reasons, which is now easily possible. I guess everybody agrees on that. I also like Rohit's suggestion on creating sort of field trip or field-based activities beside from the conference, maybe one or two, because each of us can host it in our own place, but bring in those who are interested into the country. They could be, we could apply all for funding for students, for others to create that. I call it field trip, or you can call it also summer school, something like that, so that it adds to what we are already offering to interested participants and professionals. One thing to finish with that, I just want to say, I like the idea of working with practitioners and having impact on the field, but this doesn't have to be our direct intervention. We can enable those by providing, for example, rapid training, rapid knowledge sharing, which they may need quickly, and we can offer to them. I stop here. I know time is short.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ali. And I really look forward to seeing you all in Japan. I hope we can make it. We'll see how things go, but we have a fantastic subject for the conference in Japan about the tension between innovation and tradition. And I think Japan is a great place to explore the tension between keeping heritage and traditions and culturally valuable practices, and at the same time changing to prevent future disasters. Thank you very much, guys. Ksenia, Do you want to
For
wrap up?
sure, yeah. And I think next week we will talk a little bit more about Japan, right? As Liz Mali and her colleagues are joining us. So please, everyone, join us for the second week of celebration. So same time, 12 noon British summer time, we will be on the 24th of June. And thank you so much, Cassidy, Susanna, Rohit, Ali, for joining us today. And thank you, Gonzalo, for being my new co-host. Jason, watch out. You know, this has gotten really well. It's been great seeing you all. And of course, for those of you watching us online, please join us for the new season of Disasters Deconstructed, which will be in the live stream format, and we will be starting in early July. And we will be discussing critical theory. What can be more exciting? So we look forward to seeing you all, and we look forward to seeing you next week for our celebrations, second part of the celebrations. Thank you all so much. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye. Thank you, Ksenia.
Bye.
You're a great host.
Bye.